Or when you get a DNF, 25 points makes a huge difference. But yesterday in Barcelona, probably one of the best Grand Prix I've seen in Barcelona in over a decade. And was it because of the rules, or is it because the teams are much closer to each other? And the duck has been broken. Lewis Hamilton is now a winner for McLaren, Mercedes, and for Ferrari. Unbelievable celebrations yesterday. Incredible crowd response. And wow. Did you expect it, Delucia?
I'm going to be very honest with you. When I saw how quick he was in all the practice sessions and qualifying, I thought, hold on a second, Ferrari finally has a chance to win. And yes, the safety car came in at the right time, but if I just take out the safety car in the race, Lewis Hamilton on pace would have won. He was miles ahead of everyone else, and having kept up with Kimi Antonelli, gapping Russell as well at that point, I think, it was really, really impressive to see Lewis just turn it on and go full hammer time. It was such a great win for him, and I think it really does help when, for the last year, if you look at how much he's been involved in the process of developing this new car with the Ferrari engines back home at the factory and the mechanics, I think that he's brought that winning spirit of coming from a team who's won for decades, where he's won his 7 titles and his expertise from his days at McLaren to Ferrari. And I think it's finally paid off. I mean, Charles Leclerc had such beautiful words to say towards him at the end. Yes, disappointing race for Leclerc, but at the end of the day, Ferrari still won. It's the first time they've won in almost 2 years. It's the first time Hamilton has won since 2024. Everything about it seemed perfect, especially the fact that 30 years ago to the day, Michael Schumacher won his first race for Ferrari as well. And I think everything just came together so wonderfully. It was one of those races where you could tell that everybody in the paddock, fans at home, I don't think there was a dry eye at all, because it was so well deserved. And to the fan who told, Lewis, remember who you are, I'm glad that he remembered, because you don't become a 7-time world champion for nothing. And yeah, I was just really, really impressed with the pace of the Ferrari. And the best part is, Sash, in 2 weeks' time, when we head back to Austria, they're bringing a brand new engine, way more upgrades. So with the way that they're racing, I think Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton really have a shot at the championship title.
Yeah, the game is on. Without a doubt, the game is on. Don't discount the likes of Ferrari and, of course, Lewis Hamilton. He's got the experience. That's the one thing that he has massively over George Russell and the likes of Kimi Antonelli, and perhaps even his teammate, Charles Leclerc. And the fact is that he is a world champion. He knows how to be calculated, what to do, when to do it, and of course that is going to definitely work in his favor. You summed it up beautifully in the sense of what this means to Ferrari. Also, strategy. For once, Ferrari right on point. Now, yesterday afternoon, I was with a whole group of people, and I do a pre-chat and a post-chat with everyone, and I said, guys, the offset of the new tire or a fresh set of tires is massive, because I saw it in the Formula 2 race. As soon as the guys went in and changed their tires, it was incredible. It was chalk and cheese. And yesterday there was a 3-second margin between old tires and new tires. And Ferrari had it right. And even without the virtual safety car, Lewis would have been able to take both. I mean, Antonelli, unfortunately, stopped on the side of the track. But if Antonelli was still in the race, he would have been able to take both George and Antonelli and go on to win that race. So, superb from Ferrari. Desperately unlucky for the likes of Charles Leclerc, yet again, besides his crash in qualifying. Car just stops. Kimi Antonelli does a brilliant move to overtake his teammate, George Russell. And then all of a sudden, he's out of the race with an engine failure. That's 4 Mercedes engine failures in the last 3 races. And then, of course, Nico Hülkenberg, brilliant the way that he managed his tires when it came to qualifying. He understood what he needed to do, got them in the right temperature, gets into the top 10. And bizarrely, a piece of stone comes and hits the front of his nose cover and hits the kill switch. I mean, where in the world can you get more unlucky than that for the likes of the Hulk?
It was honestly one of those moments, where in Final Destination, it is the most obscene things that actually just kill the race. That is exactly what happened to Nico Hulkenberg, because I was excited to see how well Audi was performing in this race, because they really were keeping up with the other midfield teams. And I thought, okay, this is a chance for them to collect some points. Very disappointing for them. Another unlucky weekend for Charles Leclerc. At this point, it's so devastating to see what is going on with him. The crash was horrendous in qualifying, like you said, but also in the race itself. You could see how much pace the Ferrari had. We saw it with Lewis, but with Charles as well, making his way through the field. He was fantastic, taking over Piastri, battling with Norris at one point, Max as well. And then all of a sudden, it just, goes sour for him, as it has for the last couple of weekends. And then he had a hydraulic issue as well, on top of everything else. So, that's disappointing. But you know what? We have to look at the positives here, because Max Verstappen in fourth. We knew that the Red Bull, car was quite quick. Interestingly enough, we mentioned it last week. The Ford powertrains was found to be the most powerful out of everybody, which even for them was very surprising. They were surprised to learn that, because now it means that they don't get as many upgrades and monies sent to them to help them with their upgrades. But Max Verstappen did a great job in the race as well. Isaac Hadjar, terrible start for him, but was able to capitalize throughout the race. Also just shows you there is pace in the car, not as quick as, the others, but it is there. And then our racing bulls. I mean, Lawson, Albert Lindblad, well done to them. That 10-second penalty that got handed to Franco Colapinto afterwards demoted him to 10th, but the other two collected points in 8th and 9th. Brilliant, brilliant weekend for all four Red Bull drivers who scored points for the first time together.
Yeah, incredible. So I think they definitely have something very, very special. The incredible thing about the Barcelona or Spanish Grand Prix, and this one is going to be the last one for a couple of years, is that this track usually doesn't give us a terrific race because of the turbulent air. It's such a difficult track to get right, and that's why all of the testing gets done in Barcelona, is because this sets up your car. If you can have a good car at Barcelona, it usually means you're going to have a good car going forward throughout the season. And if you look at a team like Audi, and I'd like to point them out, because Audi looked really, really good. I mean, it's desperate what happened with Hulkenberg. But all of a sudden, you start looking at that car and you're saying, man, if that car's good around Barcelona, the more that they bring updates or whatever, this car is definitely going to be pushing into the midfield. And I wouldn't be surprised, even though they're a good 20 points behind Haas, I think they're definitely going to get up there, and definitely going to get up to the likes of Alpine as well. Another great result for Alpine yesterday. Yes, there were cars that fell out, but you've got to be there at the end. You can lose a race in the first corner. You can't necessarily win a race in a first corner. But it was a brilliant, brilliant Grand Prix. It's one of those at Barcelona, as I said right in the beginning, you just go, man, is this going to deliver something? And it did. And I sit and go, well, is it these new regulations, or is it the fact that the cars are actually just closer together? And Mercedes, I think still, in my opinion, is probably the top of the pecking order. But Ferrari made a massive statement yesterday and over the weekend. And now when we go forward into Austria with a different engine, with a little bit more horsepower, they definitely have to look over their back. And they've got to now try and control both of their drivers. Because Russell, yesterday at a stage, I was waiting. I was going, if Toto Wolff says, George, move over for Kimi, that would have been the death knell for George Russell. But he let them race, and eventually, with touching a little bit of front wing or whatever, Antonelli did get past, and then unfortunately his car broke down. But this is now going to play big time into George Russell's mind, knowing that Kimi Antonelli is not going to hold back and is actually quicker than him.
And that's the thing about the two Mercedes drivers, is when I looked at the race yesterday, in terms of how they were battling one another, I love a good squabble between the two of them. It's always, always, always on the edge. But I think if you look at the overall race, Kimi was actually a lot more aggressive and quicker than George in the end. And had he not had the engine malfunction, I genuinely think he would have ended second. And this also puts a really interesting perspective into someone like George Russell, because now it's no longer about playing mind games, because Kimi's been one of those drivers where he'll show you on the track exactly what kind of racer he is. And I think for George, who has been talking in the media a lot and saying, Kimi has already won it, he's got nothing to lose at this point, it's his to lose, right? You did so well this whole weekend. You have to commend George for his recovery after the last couple of races. But I think where the dynamic now shifts is Kimi is faster than George. And I'm looking forward to seeing how this whole situation is going to play out for the rest of the season. Also, I thought it was quite ironic that it was Nico Rosberg who was interviewing Lewis Hamilton 10 years after they had their crash in Spain. So I thought that was quite ironic. And now we're looking at Kimi and George. Will they have the same fate? Because it doesn't look like their squabbling is going to stop anytime soon. I think it's only going to get turned up way more. But the person who's going to pick up that is the Ferrari behind them, and the Max Verstappens and the McLarens, who unfortunately McLaren had nothing to show for this weekend. They were pretty much middle of the road. But I will say well done to Lando Norris, one of the three British drivers on the podium. The first time in more than 60 years there were three British drivers on the podium. But I think McLaren actually have quite a bit of work to do in order to keep up with everybody else, because they seem to be also having their own race towards the end there, just on their own, not really battling one another or battling the other team. The same with Red Bull. It just kind of felt like the only ones that were battling were Kimi, George, and Lewis.
Yeah, very much so. I think a team that actually came out yesterday the best out of everything was McLaren. Unexpectedly, but George Charles Leclerc falling out, Kimi Antonelli falling out. All of a sudden, they get a third and a fifth, but they are nowhere. And I don't know. Norris seems to have a much better handle of the car than Piastri. Piastri was very, very disappointing over the weekend. And I say disappointing in the sense that we expect a little bit more from McLaren. I think they've got a lot of work to do. I know they're going to work very, very hard, but they don't seem to be in this fight anymore. And, I want to go back to Mercedes because I think they missed a little bit of an open goal yesterday. Lewis started on the softs, was hoping to get to sort of jump on George Russell. George streaked out into the lead, but the strategy of Ferrari was very, very clever. And when they brought in the Ferrari to change its tires, that Mercedes had to react because of the offset. And everyone knew that there was going to be this huge difference in time between a new set of tires and an old set of tires. So they basically played the long game. But the problem is that Mercedes was squabbling between Kimi Antonelli and George Russell, and all of a sudden let Lewis into the game. And going forward, they are going to have to make a decision as to who they back at Mercedes. Because if you've got the likes of Lewis Hamilton, and I tell you, just give him a sniff, you know that he's going to go there and take it. If they don't sort of try and start protecting the lead that Kimi Antonelli has, they are going to land up second, third, fourth in the championship.
And we've seen that happen before. It happened last year. And we saw that almost fall away from McLaren at some point with their drivers, with Max Verstappen as well. And I think with Lewis, the way that he's driving as well, you have to give credit to his ability just to shift his mindset. He had a dismal 2025 to the point where a lot of people were saying, he's done. He also said, I think it's time for me to step away from the sport for a little bit. But, he kept on pushing, he kept on working and driving. And I think where Lewis is now, he is going to gun for that 8th world title. And I think if Mercedes do not absolutely maximize what they have right now, they are going to fall by the wayside. So that lead that Kimi currently has to Lewis, which I don't think we would have said at the end of last year, that Lewis Hamilton was going to come into 2026 as the second in the Drivers' Championship. I think if they are able to really wanting to protect that lead, they are really just going to have to go balls to the wall with that. And anything can happen with all the changes that are still going to come, the upgrades that are going to come, how those are going to, take to the track. I'm very, very curious to see how fast that the Mercedes really is in comparison to the Ferraris, because those are the two teams, I think, that are just the closest in terms of taking one another to the end.
Yeah, and there's something that we've also got to consider here is that Mercedes are already on the maximum of their various power unit elements that they have used. So Anything now going forward, if they have a mechanical failure, and we'll find out what happens with Kimi Antonelli's car by the time we get to Austria. But going forward, they will incur penalties, grid penalties, because they've got a new MG or a new battery unit or a new ice-powered unit, etc. So this is also going to play a big factor.
I think if you even look at, we haven't even touched on, the back markers from yesterday, but if you look at Cadillac and Aston Martin, their incidents that they have had, I have to also just give credit to Sergio Perez, because even though the car is an absolute tractor, he has been able to stay with the likes of Haas, with the likes of Audi in that particular race. I think Bottas is struggling on the other hand with everything, but if you look at how the rest of the field has played out, Williams was not there. They had a disappointing weekend. And on the weekend that Alex Albon became, the Williams driver who had the most starts with the team. So there was a disappointing edge to the back of the field. But at the same time, I feel like they also have a lot that they can improve on going into the next few races, because they're the teams that are actually going to get the most help going into the second half of the season. So this is going to be interesting to see how they're going to fare, because I am hopeful that Cadillac can at some point get some points on the board, because we saw Aston Martin do it. They had a dismal weekend. Lance Stroll was so miserable in the media pen, when he was talking about how to improve the car. He's like, I don't know, it's the same as always, and I get it. It's frustrating. There is a lot going on, but, Charles Leclerc and his frustration as well with all the incidents that he's had is not as dismal. But I think with where everyone's faring, it is still an open book to see who's going to battle out towards the end, because even with the midfield, there's so much chopping and changing going on, with the Alpines, the Haas, the Audis. So I'm looking forward to it, because it looks like the Racing Bulls, with their consistency, that battle between Alpine is really heating up.
Yeah, very much so. Let's just stick a little bit with those three teams you spoke about: Cadillac, Aston Martin, and of course Williams. Barcelona is very much a chassis derived circuit. If your chassis is good over there, you will be relatively decent going forward. Carlos Sainz probably did a better job than Alex Albon. Whether or not Mr. Williams still have a weight issue, I'm not entirely sure. But this highlighted how poor Aston Martin, Williams, and Cadillac are at this track, unfortunately. I know that Aston Martin have got some power issues, but the car still looked terrible. Terrible. Okay. Also, on that, whoever does the PR for Aston Martin should be fired. Because if you've got both of your drivers just slamming your team and the car and everything around and everything that's happening in Aston Martin, then you know what, you're not briefing your drivers correctly. No matter how tough things are, you do not go there and say, oh, it's just rubbish and everything's the same and no, there's no improvement. You know what, that's just really not good for you as a brand. So Aston Martin really need to, and yes, I love Fernando Alonso and he can be outspoken, but Fernando is a world champion with the most drives ever in the history of Formula One. Do me a favor, try and be a little bit positive to help your team get out of the mess that they're in, as opposed to just slamming them. Cadillac, I just don't know. Bottas seems to have all of the bad luck as well. I agree with you with Perez. I think he's doing his absolute best, but they're going to have to turn up the wick very quickly over there. And Williams, one of the most established and brilliant teams. I love James Vowles, but I'm beginning to lose patience with him, because it's, every week it's another excuse. Oh, well, no, James, I'm sorry. Enough of, yes, who your owners are and how backwards it was then. You have the experience to make this car better, and somewhere along the line, something's not gelling within Williams.
And, they've had more than enough time to be able to develop a really good car. They started the season dismally, absolutely in the trenches. But at the same time, other teams were able to pick themselves up. I mean, Audi basically started from scratch with their own, same with Red Bull, their own power units. They had to figure out their own things. And I think that's also a little bit more difficult. But Williams has a Mercedes power unit. Let's remember that. They have one of the strongest power units and engines, and the fact that the design in its entirety was completely wrong, the maths was incorrect, I think that's really disappointing because you've got an incredible lineup of Albon and Sainz. Two drivers who are incredibly hungry, they're very intelligent, they have great racing IQ, and they are not able to showcase those skills because you're not giving them the car to be able to do that. So I'm also a bit disappointed in how Williams has been over the last few races, but do you know what? It's kind of like how you feel about Aston Martin. Like you want them to score and you want them to do well. It's just a matter of time before they're able to just find some points, and maybe they will surprise with a podium. We never know. Racing has been so interesting, and we found the most unusual suspects on the podium throughout history. So maybe they'll
Yeah.
do that at some random point in the year. But for now, I think all eyes on Kimi and Hamilton for the title for this year.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm glad. That's the best way to sum it up, is sit and say this championship is very, very much alive. Mercedes are going to have to, after I say Austria, they're going to have to make a call, and if Kimi gets ahead of George, but they're behind the Ferraris, they're going to have to make the call and sit there and say, okay, we're backing Kimi. End of story. Otherwise, if they don't do that, Ferrari will make the call and back Lewis. At this stage, he's way ahead of Charles Leclerc, and Charles only has, unfortunately, himself to blame, except for the car breaking down this weekend. But crash in Monaco, crash in Montreal, probably took him out of the equation. So he's going to have to he's probably going to have to play second fiddle for the rest of the season.
And Sash, I'm going to call it now. If the squabble between Kimi and George continues and it ends negatively, the one person who is going to be able to pick up all those points, Max Verstappen, Lando Norris. Make it a 3-0 battle with them and Lewis Hamilton, and we've got an absolute showcase waiting to happen.